I'm going to announce my panel, but you know what I'm thinking is I'm going to invite them up one at a time so you have really strong name recognition with and face recognition. So why don't we start with Matt Mcginnis with 8x8. So 8x8 is a company I've known for decades and decades. They were a company in the equipment space. You ever go into their office, they have a zillion patents on their wall going back to the 90s before there was even before most of us even knew what VoIP was. And then they became a carrier or service provider somewhere in the 2002, 2003 timeframe. And Matt, welcome. So our next panelist is Mark Straton with Broadsoft. So Broadsoft is a company behind a lot of the cloud communications that all of us use. They're instrumental in providing literally millions and millions of seats, and now contact center seats. The hosted communications market is really powered by their products, and Mark is no stranger to ITEXPO. He's keynoted here numerous times, and I remember back, it was maybe 2002, 2003, in Miami, where when the communications industry was kind of in an interesting inflection point, and Mark was good enough to give a great keynote at that time. Welcome back to the show. Next up, we have Curtis Peterson with RingCentral. So, RingCentral, another long-time player in the cloud communication space, lots of experience, literally. Anyone who knows this space knows RingCentral. They were an early and fast-growing market participant, and we're thrilled to have them. So with that, I'm gonna launch into my questions. I like interactivity, so I think the audience gets more out of a session if they can actually participate. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I will call on you when the time comes or when it makes sense. But I'm going to start with some of the questions that I have, and we'll go from there. So first off, I'm going to ask the audience a question. Does everyone here, have you guys heard what's happening with Avaya, with the bankruptcy proceedings? Are you guys aware of it? Okay, so just a quick show of hands. How many people here are more likely to choose a different vendor because of what's happening with Avaya? Okay, so that's not too many people. How many people are more likely to switch to cloud because of what's happening with? Okay, a couple people. All right, so maybe that'll change after the panelists get a chance to respond to my first question to the panel, and that is, what are your thoughts on the Avaya bankruptcy?
Great, thank you. I appreciate being here this morning. And yes, I think, ultimately, if you had a copy of the Wall Street Journal a week ago or so, you would notice my company's position on the Avaya bankruptcy. Ultimately, it's...
I'm sorry, I just have to interject because you took out, I believe, a full-page ad.
That's correct, a full-page ad.
And you basically... You got to articulate. Tell us a little bit more.
Absolutely, yeah. We basically, it's unfortunate to see a company go through something like that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Avaya and what they've done over the years. However, we believe this completely validates the switch to the cloud. And it's very hard for a CapEx-first company to do that without restructuring. We understand that, but complete validation on the cloud story and where the vendors actually on the stage here are all taking the communications market, we believe, is the go-forward way.
Fantastic.
Well, I think Broadsoft feels that it's the natural heir to Avaya, and the reason for that is, Avaya customers are capabilities, rich applications, the ability to scale to large enterprises are really critical items. And so for channel partners or for customers, Broadsoft is the one company that's global and scales from a micro business to some of the largest enterprises and government institutions in the world, including the U.S. Senate, Office Depot, and others. So we think we're in a good place to really capitalize on what's happened with Avaya. But I think when you think about Avaya, I thought the ad was fantastic. The cloud won. It couldn't be a clearer or better message. But the reality is that Avaya went bankrupt because they were bought by private equity and bought Nortel. And I'm proud to say that when I was at Unify, we helped drive that price up to help that situation. So the Avaya situation is complex, so I'd give maybe a little bit more credit. They'll probably start to throw off a lot of cash now, so it's a good thing for them. But at the end of the day, if you've read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, they did a study. In any company, any tech company that misses a technology curve, there were 0 examples when that company was able to recover unless they caught the next wave. So Apple, the next wave would be smartphones, iPads, things of that nature, as a for example. So I think Avaya is in a really difficult situation. If you look at the past, Avaya, Nortel, Siemens, where I spent a lot of my career, you can't fight a trend is the bottom line. So it's going to be a tough future for them.
Yeah, and I agree with what's been said here. I think from an IT buyer perspective, and just kind of put myself in their shoes, what you see in markets is an inflection point, right? And, we have this technology generation. Really, cloud is about the 4th generation of what we've seen with IP telephony in the enterprise space. And so these inflection points always start to show some signs, right? Some cracks in the way things evolve from generation to generation. We saw that with, H.323 gateway gatekeeper, getting into media gateway soft switch, that inevitably went into hosted, that then turned into cloud. And so I think the Avaya component, obviously there's a lot of financial structuring, which I think Mark touched on there. But what you are really seeing now is the beginnings of the preference change, right? It's let's move away from a box mentality. Let's start to think about how we can ease administration, how we handle multi-location, how we drive user experience through software, right? And it's these facets that I know we at 8x8 look at sort of the needs and the wants. And before it used to be, I didn't quite care about software on my smartphone and have it controlled under an administrator, type method. Now that's gone from a want to a need. And because of that, what we're starting to see is this inflection point to where the cracks are showing in the generational shift. And I think the Avaya bankruptcy is just one of those pieces that now really sends a strong signal for me as an IT buyer. And I need to start thinking about how I, over the next 2, 3, 5, 6 years, plan for success in my business. Plan for the right technology trend that's going to hit the mark to empower my employees to be as competitive as they can be worldwide. So I think that's the key. We do a lot of surveys as well, just to really understand what's happening with the market. And in that data, we're seeing about every 5.2 years, an IT team is making a decision about their business communication collaboration system. And that inflection shows that 20 or so % of the market needs to make a decision, right? And so yes, I can push that off, but what that does, it starts to affect how people can be productive. And so this is just the first sign. There are going to be a number of other signs that we'll see over the next year or 2 years. But I think just to wrap it up, I think it's a matter of if, not matter of when, not if.
Fantastic. So next question is, now that we've discussed either legacy or CPE or whatever you want to call it versus cloud, where is the market headed? Where is cloud going? You mentioned collaboration. Is collaboration a big part of the future of cloud? Will multiple cloud systems start to interoperate more effectively, business systems with collaboration? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And at RingCentral, our belief is that the business communication system has to be, first of all and foremost, ridiculously agile. So we have a very high spend on R&D and a quick implementation of new features, as we have 4 generations working in the workforce right now, of which millennials are now the largest group in there. All 4 of those generations have a different entry point into how they think about communicating with somebody else. If you go into the older generations, probably more my age, we think voice first, we think contact first, we think personal first. I can tell you that a bunch of recent college grads barely get to that point. They've already settled things on text, planned their entire evening, done their entire presentation, and the sit-downs to go through the whole thing. We believe we have to make a system that connects those diverse groups with the communication they want, anytime, anywhere, any way they want. And so that includes collaboration, voice, text, video, full immersive video collaboration like video conferencing, other conferencing options, contact center, the whole suite of that. But most importantly, and we touched on this a little bit in the discussion on Avaya, is the older model, and we're talking about why cloud is at this inflection point coming on here. The older model was managing risk. And the older model was like, put out a box that you can ship for 10 years and it doesn't break, it always works, it does the same thing it did on day one, on day 3,000. We don't live in that world anymore. We don't have the option to live in that innovation curve anymore. It's too fast of a disruptive technology for your business and for our business. So it's now about managing change. So we used to be managing risk. Now it's about managing change. The risk is actually not making the change. So that's why RingCentral, again, we believe in rapid innovation, high R&D spend, get all the multi-modes of communications that all the workers want inside their company, and be that vendor that supplies the next need before our customers believe they actually need it.
I just want to start out by saying that I'm really jealous of Matt and his socks. And if you haven't seen those, they're 8x8 socks. So we're going to have to get some Broadsoft socks made. So
in fashion.
Yeah, so I'm not embarrassed next year. My son would be ashamed of me. But in any case, I don't think we can say the cloud won yet. I think the cloud, in many parts of IT, it has won, but in communications, it's got some things to prove. And customers have to have confidence. I think there's enough base out there now that they do, and I think the trend will persist. But at the end of the day, I think that you have to bring something more to the party than just another communications system. And so I think the idea of appealing to different generations is good. But already today, the millennials are the major, they're the majority in the workforce today. And so that's the way that people communicate. But I think at the end of the day, the cloud solutions, they have to bring more to the party. They have to bring the benefits that the cloud brings to the party. That's about productivity and teamwork and transformation. And so I believe that, Siemens, when I was there, was really the first vendor to announce unified communications, believe it or not. And, it never took off. And it never took off because fundamentally you couldn't do it with a premise-based system in a true, deeply integrated way. The interesting thing is now working at Broadsoft is that it's pervasive, it's in everything, it's easy, there's no training, there's no nothing, you just get your client and you go. As a matter of fact, at Broadsoft, the main way that you use your phone is really your cell phone, even in the office. But I think when I think about where's cloud communications going, what is it really gonna do, I really think it's about this idea of workspaces, right? So you need some desk phones. Yes, you have some people who are mobile, that are primarily smartphone based. Then you have some people in the office, maybe they're just a processing clerk or something like that. But for most of us here, we're probably knowledge workers, and our work is built around teams. And so I think you're going to really see a blurring of unified communications and team collaboration or things like Slack. I don't think you're going to see in the future a standalone Slack. I think these workspaces are going to be integrated together seamlessly with unified communications. And the interesting thing is when you see how the younger generation operates on WhatsApp and things of this nature, they're essentially like little mini workspaces. And so I think these workspaces need to bring together the voice communications, the messaging that you, in today's world, start with, but the ability to take that to a conference, but not only that, to be able to manage teamwork, where you can take notes, you can have tasks, and maybe the most interesting innovation to me that I've seen really in 15 years is this idea of contextual intelligence, where when you call me, I get all the files that we've been working on. I get all the social interactions that we've been working on. Or if I'm in a team workspace, I get all this information too. And if you think about how much time you spend doing that, and there's studies on this, and the numbers are pretty shocking. It's hours a day that people just spend looking for information. So when you start to bring these things together in this idea of the workspaces, I think that cloud communications can be transformational because of the way it can integrate with other technologies. And you see that in the consumer world already.
Yeah, so I agree. And you know what we're seeing with that generation is really preference for communication, right? And so the millennial, the Gen Zs, as they start to enter the workforce, you know, voice that used to be the killer app really gets blended with this textual-based communication. And what that means actually opens up a whole new realm of possibility and opportunity. You know, we've gone from UC to UCaaS. You know, we've been starting to play around in the industry with a new term called UCNC, or Unified Communication and Collaboration, as actually the new definition of UCaaS, right? And so, you know, and this actually is exhibited in a number of different areas. So whether or not it's your mobile device and having a mobile app, or a WebRTC-oriented desktop type experience. I know Mark touched on this workspace, you know, or the work environment. You know, where do you work? I mean, think about that. You know, you're working now. You're working in the plane. You're working in the car. You're working in your office. You're working in a conference room. Those are all different work environments to where the Swiss Army knife of UCNC and its different facets of what it can do to empower the user really all culminate into what method is the best form of communication and what combination helps me to really achieve my task. Or, you know, whether or not it's person to person, which is a whole nother, you know, environmental element, or is it a multi-party type communication, you know. These things and the richness in the form of communication all coming together into very simplified software-driven tool sets really is the future. And that's where this is going. You know, I look at things like team collaboration tools. You know, I'll give the nod to Glip for the RingCentral. Broadsoft has done a great job in their new software clients. But, you know, the HipChats, the Slacks, you know, we're kind of seeing that as a little bit of the Pareto boundary of what UCaaS turns into with UCNC. And I think the culmination of that with how you select a platform, what's the platform you choose? And what tool set do you then allow to empower? And how do you open that up so it becomes connected with all the different cloud tool sets that all come together? And so, you know, I think cloud has started a little bit as that walled garden. It has opened up. It's been empowered through software. We've redefined the needs and the wants. And then from there now it's about bringing all the leaders in the space together into a portfolio, you know, through open API. And so there's a whole host of things we could go into, you know, from that frontier. But definitely very, very exciting from what cloud can do for the space.
Now, I heard the word millennial at least once in some of your answers. I'm curious. Many companies, based on the research that's out there, are adjusting, evolving, changing to make the millennials comfortable. Is this, just give me some thoughts, like audience, how many people here think it's smart or makes sense for us to be evolving for millennial? Does that make us more efficient, more productive? Should they be adjusting to the software we have and the systems we have? What do you guys think? Anyone have? All right, so I guess I have to phrase this in a yes/no. How many people think it's good that we evolve our corporations to be more understanding of the way millennials work? Wow, that's a good number. Well, that's like 50, 60%. How many people feel the opposite, that millennials should be figuring out how to work with what we have already? A few people. That's a very few. Wow. So the surveys seem to have it right. Now, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so when it comes to millennials in the workplace, we saw the hands going up in the air here, and I hope the second group wasn't calling millennials snowflakes. Just to be clear, they weren't. They were just discussing. But the workforce adopted my generation as well, and lots of things changed in the workplace. We wanted more conference rooms, less offices. So a lot of my mentors and so forth gave up their office spaces or started building cultures where there weren't closed off office spaces. If you remember the old corporate design, all the non-VPs sit in the middle. All the VPs and above have the office on the outside of the wall. So on the inside, you get no light unless you bring your own.
What's wrong with that?
Well, we got rid of it. So, and I think now with the millennials, we want them to be productive. They are the biggest part of our workforce. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, our jobs is, you know, my past life as a CIO and your lives as technologists out there is making technology work for people, and this is the largest group in the workforce now, making them the most productive they can. It will require some changes. Again, though, I'll go back to cloud and multimodal communications, of which, you know, there's lots of varieties of, which is great. That really fits the bill for the spectrum in there, but it does tell millennials, hey, I'm listening, I'm putting something together for you.
Maybe I'll talk a little bit about how I work with a workspace, because I know most of you probably think I'm a millennial, but I'm not. But this is my perception of how they work, right? So anyways, with our Team One product, this is the workspace product, and I don't want to, it's not a commercial, I just want to describe to you how I use it, because I think it will be interesting. And so you think of like team collaboration, right, or a group messaging system as just that, right? Well, how we use it, and what I found is that when I start my day, I have a dashboard, and I can see all my applications. You know, I can, on my panel, one panel I can switch between email, Concur, whatever I want to do, right? Get the messaging in the middle, and then the contextual information on the side. But so I can start my day in this workspace, and in that workspace, I can have all my tasks, I have all my messages, whether it be instant messaging or email, and I can get going for the day. So that's kind of me as a workspace, using it not like how you would think you would use it. But then, when I talk to folks that work with me or I work with frequently, I can use it in a one-to-one basis, because I can store all my messages with them, all my emails, all my communications, do videos, whatever, one-to-one with them, take notes on our calls, assign action items or tasks, whatever. And I think what's interesting is we're actually using this, my AR team is using it, so when we meet with analysts, we have a workspace that we use for that analyst. So instead of having a contact management system, we have a complete record of all of our communications, every file we've used, et cetera, as well as their social information and background, right? Because the social profile of an analyst now is a lot more important than just the reports that they publish. So again, that's a contact management type of thing. And then you might have ad hoc meetings, you might have planned meetings, or you might have true kind of what I would call team collaboration, where they're ongoing things. So when we do a press release now, or any of these types of things, or a formal team meeting, we're doing a big Avaya replacement type of campaign, which I'm sure everybody here is working on. But we put these workspaces together that has all the information. So you think that you'd have enterprise messaging around just teams and group collaboration, but we use it for personal, for one-to-one, for contact management, and as a team. So that's how I think this technology is going to evolve as we move forward. But it's an interesting paradigm, and I'll tell you, it took me a little bit of time to get used to it, but I'll tell you, for me, it's transformational.
And Rich, I think I'll answer, I mean, yes, as part of being a customer-driven organization, you need to be designing for your customer, right? And these are definitely the decision makers, customers, of the future. But, I think that if you dig into it a little deeper, what you start to find is that, we are social by nature. If we just look at our psyche, right? And we want to be connected with others, whether or not it is, in your personal life or your business life. And so what we've been able to do is take this digital age and really make deeper connections through the different means and the tools that kind of facilitate that socialization, right? And so what we're starting to see in the workforce, specifically, is that, we need to be able to use and build business tools so that we can make that more effective, make that group more effective. But I also look at it from a cost of communication. And I don't mean dollars and cents per se. What I mean is that I have something very quick that I have to express. It's a yes, no. It's a let's do something, or let's meet here, or, I agree with you or I disagree with you, right? That can be very simply performed in an instant message, or a team message, or a text message, right? And so I have expended the least amount of effort to be able to communicate in the fastest and most efficient way. I think as you start to, and I think we are also getting busier in that we have more responsibility. We have more things we have to address, both in the business world and the personal world. And so you start to think about the cost of communication, and in all of its facets, a voice call is very often the most expensive transaction. I have to, get the phone, get the number, find the number or the contact, we're now on the phone in an engaged session. I cut out the rest of the world because I'm focused on that communication. As soon as I put that phone down, I can sort of reconnect with how I can multitask with the different communication channels that I need to be addressing. And so, now it's what is the best way to communicate and what's the least cost way from an effort perspective to really get my point across and be as productive as possible. And I think this is where Millennial, Gen Z, they are thriving. They're actually showing us the way. It's not us being reactive. They're showing us the new way for how they prefer to communicate in this hyper-connected, hyperactive world. And I think those tells are very, very interesting for us as we develop rich software to make the user truly empowered in this next generation. And so, I'll stop short of saying, voice is dead, because voice is the most important form of communication. But it's becoming less and less important. It's becoming more and more costly. So, different angle to the question.
Thanks. Next question I have is, the carriers are able to provide cloud communication solutions as well. And so we come up with an interesting dilemma, and that is that the panelists here on the ends compete with the carriers, and Mark's company provides a lot of carriers with the infrastructure to sell hosted or cloud communication. So the question is, why would I go with a non-wireless carrier cloud communications solution? So what are the pros and cons of going with like a Verizon or a Sprint as opposed to going with 8x8 or RingCentral?
Right. Mind if we mix up the order?
Whatever you like.
Okay, good. I know there are sort of two philosophies on the panel, so I think this will be interesting. My perspective from 8x8 is that there's really a separation now that has been occurring for years, and it's the separation of the utility broadband layer and the application layer. One thing about applications is they move fast. It is very, very quick to develop great software and iterate and add. I come from a big iron telco background. It was $1 million boxes into large carriers, tier 1, tier 2, worldwide. And I'll tell you, the cycle of both development for the box and then the integration into the network to then the beta rollout, we're talking years, right? And so the separation of that infrastructure network broadband layer as a utility to then add the application as a separate component and have that be able to evolve very, very quickly, frankly, is meeting the needs of the customer that much better. I think, and I use the term monolithic. When we think about how to design and build network components, it used to be that purpose-built switch that we had in the network. Now with it completely disaggregated, we can start to really specialize and get better at the elements that really help in the total solution sell. So as we start to evolve to 5G, which I think is a very important evolution of the broadband utility, what the effect is an even richer engagement tool set, as we move lightning fast on application development. So, the separation of those layers, the fact is, I don't need voicemail to be integrated and show up native to the phone. I can do that through CallKit and Open API, in the endpoints to be able to have different personalities, my personal and my business, right? Those problems are very easily solved at that layer rather than having to address it from a monolithic design perspective. So,
fantastic.
I guess I have a little bit of a different view. Now, I would say, I think actually from a technical point of view, that's correct. I don't want to give too much of a commercial, but those of you that know me, I will. But Broadsoft does, we work through the service providers, but we also market directly. We own a company in Germany called PlayStel that's on fire. We own a company in Japan that's doing well as well. But we've got 25 of the top 30 service providers worldwide by revenue. We've got, depending on who you believe, 45% of the installed base. By the way, that's 3.5 times what Cisco has, 10 times what RingCentral has, just to put it in perspective. And we're shipping if you compare our market share to others, it's massively, nobody else is even close in terms of today's shipments. Just might add, we also have the world's largest contact center installed base by about a factor of 2.5. So why do I mention this? Because these are sold through service providers. And if you go back in time, before the PBX era, in the Centrex era or things like that, the service providers had a lot larger market share than what they have today. And so the cloud brings back some of the core competitive advantages that they have. Now, they've got to move quickly. They've got to take advantage of some of the things that Matt was talking about, but they are actually, if they execute, they're in a very strong position. The other thing I'd say is that, having run the marketing at Siemens worldwide, when you get outside the borders of the United States, and about 35% of Broadsoft's business outside the United States and growing rapidly, it's realpolitik. And what do I mean by that? When you get into smaller countries, the service providers, their institutions, their employment bureaus, their national pride, they're important. They often do more things, even in some of the larger countries. So as you get outside the borders of the United States, they're in a much stronger, I would say, marketing and selling position, particularly as you get into small countries. And then the last point I would make is, if you haven't or aren't familiar with Verizon One Talk, take a deep look at it, go watch their videos, because I think you're seeing the future. Vodafone's doing the same thing in Europe and in other parts of the world. But they have a potentially a very large advantage if they can integrate the business communications into the native experience on the smartphone, which is what Verizon's done with One Talk, and Apple's Call Kit is kind of a partial way to get there. So you can integrate right into the mobile network, and when you can do that, they could create some very interesting competitive advantages. And if you look, as another example, from an economic point of view, from a customer point of view, they are bundling the same thing that it's called Unison, the same thing that Verizon's doing, the smartphone and the mobile, so you can eliminate a landline, right? And you can eliminate a mobile connection, so you just buy one, user connection. And so these are some very powerful economics. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So Broadsoft is, you'll see us do some different things with the channel, but we think the service providers are going to continue to play a big role, and we think that strategically they have some advantages that would allow them to actually gain significant market share as they move into the future.
Great, and I would just throw out there the following add-on is, if you go back about a year and a half ago, there's a company that came out, it was called WhatsApp, and it was an over-the-top application, and it was a displacement of the native SMS application in there. It erased $100 million of carrier revenue in 30 days. Okay, so that, I believe, is the paradigm of where things are going to move. I don't dispute that Broadsoft has done a great job providing software stacks for carriers that must have a solution inside their stack. We're finding carriers, and especially customers, that want a disaggregated stack. The ability to use different carriers around the world, and have one administration point. And that does really require a separated application stack from the network layer. The other part is the amount of capitalization that it requires to keep networks current today. 5G on the horizon, we haven't even finished rolling out 4G. You've got broadband explosion still continuing, the demand for that still going through the roof. Not enough buildings in the US, especially rural, on fiber, things along these lines. The capitalization that these companies have to put into their networks really puts a drain on their ability to keep current, maintain, and be critically agile on application stack layers. So I think there's a good symbiotic relationship that can occur here. I don't think there's any reason that both modes can't exist at the same time. It's we're really talking to you guys about a gigantic market size here, 50 billion worldwide or so. It would be very conceivable that all three of us are here in 10 years doing this, and that there's a friendly competition, but there's a lot of space.
Will I be here too? I just want to make.
I don't
will
think
I be
all
here?
three of us will be here.
You don't think all through? Okay.
You run a pretty fast life, so
I gotta slow down. I had one less mojito last night.
good for you.
So, sorry, please continue.
That was actually my conclusion. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Can I just comment?
Yeah, a retort, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think, what I would say is, I don't think that separating the application from the infrastructure and an approach where you use the service providers as your channels are mutually exclusive. So just to be clear, the Broadsoft stack sits on top just like these folks. In fact, if you look at Verizon VCE, that's a managed service by Broadsoft. And I think what you'll see is, at least with Broadsoft, most of the service providers will go to a platform as a service or as a software as a service, just for the reasons that you two have been talking about up here today. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive would be the point that I would make. But again, I would argue that I think the service providers are in a powerful position to gain market share. But that doesn't mean that Broadsoft won't look and isn't looking and isn't doing other channels.
So we talked a little bit about Slack, HipChat, enterprise messaging applications. We also talked about over the top, and we also talked about missing the next wave. Is that the next wave of what we're doing with UC, and have any of us missed it, or is it early enough that we can integrate and catch up? In other words, if Slack decides that they want to become a UC player, do they wipe out a lot of the current market players or not? What happens?
Great. I guess we'll start at this
Sure,
this time. Sure.
Mix it up.
Yeah, I think one of the things to point out there is that the traditional communications methods, the ones that are, let's say, less new than the Slack chat, they're very feature rich. They're deeply embedded with companies, processes, procedures, their ability to generate revenue, their ability to manage their forces. And playing catch up on that space is really difficult to do. And we keep talking here, you know, all three of us have to deal with this. The pace of innovation right now is very hyper, has to remain so, that if we sell you a product that you can remain competitive as well. And playing catch up on legacy communication methods is a drag on a company, and I'm concerned that they might struggle in that area. They could partner, they could do other things along those lines. The flip of that is to be hyper aggressive on your innovation and acquire emerging technologies, mature them, as all the providers up here are good at maturing technologies for broad deployments, and integrating them into the entire stack to give that one seamless experience, as well as providing those legacy functions at a absolutely critical point of delivery with full feature sets and complete reliability.
Mark?
No, I think that the cloud companies, the cloud communication companies are in a powerful position. I think, WhatsApp, it's a consumer product, and when you get into the business world, voice is still, it's a big deal. That's how businesses run. It's a big deal with small businesses, and if you look at the metrics on what gets used and stuff like that. So I don't think there's any, I don't have any concern about that. I think that there will be consolidation in the market space. I think Slack is, they're going to have to do some things. We'll see. They've done a good job. But as I said earlier, in a business environment, another standalone communications application that gives you a gazillion notifications is not the answer. There's a great article, you can Google it, written, I'm divorcing Slack. I mean, it's hilarious if you read it. The guy's like weeping, I loved it, now I can't stand it anymore. I'm getting so many notifications, my head's gonna explode, right? And so that's the idea behind a workspace, right? But the workspace has to be integrated with voice, messaging, context, and it has to be able to filter. It has to be able to filter, get you what you need. So I'm pretty confident that not only didn't we miss the wave, but I think we're on the wave. I think this thing that I'm talking about here, this workspace, integrated with unified communications and voice, I think that's the big kahuna for the next decade, and I think it's going to change the world.
So definitely didn't miss it. On the wave, I agree. But I do think that is one of the most exciting areas of what's happening in this space. It's a new tool set, right? Back to that person-to-person or team-oriented communication and that level of cost and how you can integrate and tie people together. This is where that team messaging really comes in to be a powerful tool set in the overall tool set. Some early winners, I think Slack, HipChat definitely have taken the lead with that. But I think that when you start to think about what that software experience becomes, what's the core DNA? That core DNA, a lot of times, is around an instant messaging type background. Real-time communications is tough. I think we've gone through multiple generations of how to provide high-quality, enterprise-grade, real-time communications. And so now, add in this tool set, to really expand out the portfolio is really what we're talking about here. Now, I'm a little hamstrung to talk about a lot of this at this time, just because our CEO, Vic Verma, during our latest earnings call, did nod to a recent team messaging acquisition. So a lot more to talk about in March at one of the other big IT shows here in Florida. But let's just say this, that understanding who the winners are and how to interconnect that so that now teams being multi-parties within a single organization as well as external organizations, tying those components together gets to be where we start to think about how to connect people in team messaging using their preferred tool set. And so I guess I'll leave you with that, but very, very exciting frontier here. If you don't have team messaging in your environment, we see massive productivity gains, but it does have to be controlled. And I think that's an important piece for the IT administrator to keep in mind. So with that, most exciting, definitely more to come there.
So another question, this is somewhat related, but maybe not really. If you look at Facebook, they have their work, Facebook for Work, I guess, experiment. It's not huge right now, but with the number of people that already use Facebook, it could become something that takes significant market share. And then you have Microsoft that has not only Skype for Business, but they also have LinkedIn. And if you could put those two together well, seamlessly, that could be a very interesting platform for business communications as well. So the next question is, then we're leading into it, is how do we compete against those players going forward, or how will you compete against them? And is there concern? Should there not be concern?
I'll go ahead and take that one.
Sure.
Sure. Go the other way. So I think experiment was an interesting term that you used. I think this gets back to that, what's the DNA? What's the DNA of that as a tool set, and how does that fit from the developer perspective to how it works with IT and how it works with the user? And so, it's nice that some of these features are coming into play. I start thinking about, okay, how do I separate my personal life from my business personality in that type of construct, right? And, we already have, this whole work-life balance. It's all interwoven, as we all know, right?
What does that mean, by the way?
Work-life balance?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that term.
I had to look it up. It was a factor of like the 80s Urban Dictionary. But yeah, we work and live at the same time, right? And so, as you're thinking through how that all works with like a Facebook for Work, I think that gets to be a third rail, I think, for many, many businesses. Definitely some learnings there for what we do to somewhat bring that socialness, if you will, for lack of a better term, into the enterprise. But interesting experiment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think all the OTTs, they'll have maybe a little bit of success, but I go back to the point that I made earlier about this integrated workspace. At the end of the day, it's a business, and you got to be able to get people, mobile. You got to be able to work with teams. Think about if you own a HVAC company. You have one receptionist at the office. Everybody else is out. You got 5 guys out. That's a mobile business. That's a smartphone-based business. So if you can run that business with when you're a receptionist, because she only works half time, because that's all you can afford, he or she goes out. Then they have a multi-line phone on their cell phone, like they do with Verizon One Talk. That's a big deal. So it's more nuanced, I guess. But to go back to your point, Microsoft, in my judgment, if you fast forward 5 years, 10 years, Microsoft and Broadsoft slug it out for number 1 and 2. And they've got the whole stack. They've got very Cisco to Cisco with their network near monopoly in the early 2000s. You know, Microsoft has that at the desktop. So they're going to get share. But a lot of people don't trust them on the voice. And the service providers are going to fight hard, tooth and nail. There's going to be political obstacles. And so as you fast forward to the future, I'm not going to say that there won't be other winners. But that's how I see the market shaping out. And I'll just give you a kind of a proof point. Already today, and again, I don't want to be too much of a commercial, but these are important points. You know, if you combine the CPE shipments today and the cloud shipments today, and look at the market shares, right? It's Cisco, Avaya, or the other way around actually, NEC, Mitel, Broadsoft already today, and we probably lapped Mitel last year. You know, the numbers aren't in yet. If I had to guess, I'm going to guess we overtook them. I think by the end of this year or early 18, I think Broadsoft's in the number 3 position. So the point I'm trying to make is there's some strategic factors going on, and I think could some of these guys get some share? Yeah, they probably could for certain types of businesses, but I don't think they're going to be major players. I think it's Microsoft, Broadsoft, if you fast forward 5, 10 years, maybe Cisco if they can make the cloud transition.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'll start off with the, I believe my death has been prematurely announced here. I would likely
Well,
say
I
that.
didn't say, I just said, I was just talking about top 3.
Oh, exactly. So I do think it's going to be a little bit of a different slug out, and I do think there's a room for more competitors. I don't like seeing 1 or 2 dominants out there because it produces less variety for companies out there. If everybody's shopping for a communication system and you have different needs and wants for your particular business, or one type of solution fits you better than another, you don't want to go into an ice cream shop and have 31 flavors of vanilla. It's not going to work. So I do think there's a little more room for that. I think the application world has made that available. I think that's why we see the proliferation in that space and the over-the-top capabilities on there. Having said that, Microsoft's obviously a very capable competitor, although I do believe, you know, Gartner recognizes, other industry analysts recognize, we conclude as RingCentral that they've put out Skype for Business, but they're 2 years, year and a half, 2 years away from completing the feature set in there. And as we mentioned earlier, catching up on voice, you know, we've got all these companies up here have 10 plus years, 15 years in the voice business at the carrier class level, and Microsoft's just starting. And I can't emphasize how hard that was. I came from a carrier. I came from a large carrier that ran some of the other software up here, and trying to catch up on that as a software company is very, very difficult. And from the Facebook point of view, I've learned not to bet against Mark Zuckerberg. He seems to know what he's doing. But at the same time, it seems like his pursuit of media, news, and other things that drive more of his social channel and his key revenue trends are probably going to take more mind share out of that company than an enterprise tool set at the end of the day.
So we have 3 minutes left, and I was going to give each of you 1 minute for forward-looking statements, whether it's your vision or what differentiates your organization. So we start with Matt.
Sure. And this probably relates to the last question too, is that, you know, when cloud and the disaggregation of the application layer, you know, really is available, you know who it empowers? All of you. Everybody making an IT decision. You know, and when I said customer driven, you know, what happens is we are now able to directly interact for your needs. How does it solve your business problems? And, you know, being customer driven, I will tell you from experience with, you know, Tier 1 RBox, you know, Verizon does not really listen to change the roadmap, especially when it's beholden to where they don't own the technology and they can't adjust it. They have to feed that back up to somebody else, providing them the system to be able to provide that capability. You know, whereas when you're directly working with that cloud vendor and having open APIs, and open platform components, what you're able to do is really think about where you can take that tool set and embed it right into your workflow. You know, how do you need communications to enable your business? And I think that's a very important thing that I want to leave you with, is that empowerment is how we think outside of the box. We think outside of the plastic phone on the desk. You know, we start thinking about where and how you put communications in the most appropriate and most effective place to really, really empower and drive your users. And so that's a key distinction that I think, as you're thinking about, you know, these Davids, you know, versus some of the Goliaths, if you will, you know, there's a reason why application development and being able to be open platform really offers a whole nother future-proofed, unique value proposition. And so very, very key. Love to talk with more of you about what that really does to empower you.
Mark.
Yeah, just make one comment on you talked about Microsoft and where they're at, and trust me, we don't like Microsoft that much, but I think if you think, I just think back to 2000, everybody said, well, voice over IP, what about the jitter? It's not reliable enough. Cisco's never going to make it. I remember Gartner showing me a chart that predicted that they would become the #1 vendor in a certain period of time, and they nailed it. Same thing with Microsoft. It's a matter of time. They have too much channel reach. But when it comes to Broadsoft, so Broadsoft Business, which is our portfolio, it's cloud PBX, SIP trunking, really cool mobile unified communications that can be embedded into the network, the team collaboration, the workspace concept, and an enterprise class contact center used by like Office Depot, Gunte Renker, with thousands of agents worldwide. We are the heir to Avaya. Avaya customers need robust applications, and they need a financially strong vendor, one that doesn't have customer acquisition costs that are unsustainable moving into the future, one that is already significantly cash flow profitable today. So Broadsoft has the complete portfolio. It's a proven portfolio, and we have the distribution worldwide. And there are almost no examples other than Cisco and Genesys of companies, or in the contact center space, a little bit different story, that have been able to break out of North America. And this is a scale game. So long-term, Broadsoft Business, I believe, is a really strong portfolio, and it can take on and replace the portfolios of companies, the Avaya and the Nortel bases.
Thank you. Curtis.
Yes, and so, you know, likewise, I think the same about RingCentral, but we have 3 things that we're focusing on and that we believe are the vision of providing the services that the large enterprises, the previous Avaya-type customers, things along those lines, are going to be looking for. First one, global presence, the ability to have one phone system under one management console, touch-enabled, mobile configurable, with the ability to delineate permissions down to the national level or branch level and anything along those lines. And right now, we're the only company doing something like that. The next one is team collaboration. You've heard it talked about, you know, pretty extensively this morning. I think all of us up here have a vision of team collaboration, maybe some slight differences in how it's implemented. I think it'll be great to see how that works in the marketplace. You know, ours is out there for free, and I am going to briefly do an ad, but more it's go try it and see if you like team collaboration at all. Then go shop. But it's glip.com, free, give it a shot. See if team collaboration does something for you. Try something in there. But the last one is open platform. Making sure that our platform is accessible, can be built into applications, the data is transportable by the customer, and the gentleman from 8x8 here mentioned, you know, the democratization of IT. I believe the BYOD, bring your own device, bring your own network, bring your own other things, are going to continue to be in the marketplace, and there'll be a very real need for that type solution.
Okay, so we really don't have a lot of time, but we're at the end, but there was a question from the audience. Can we have a very condensed question? Phil, is that you?
So last week, the FCC nominated a new chairman who is a staunch anti-net neutrality proponent. And we can fully expect that within the next month, all net neutrality rules will be eliminated by the FCC. There's a full expectation that the carriers will react fairly strongly over the next 3 to 6 months in terms of changing the underlying rules of transport. I wrote last year that net neutrality was a great boon to enterprises. Once that happens, all over-the-top services are going to be essentially, let's put it this way, impacted by the carriers. So can you comment on what you think the impact is going to be on over-the-top UCAS services over the next year as net neutrality is eliminated and the carriers actually have the option of essentially throttling those services and eliminating their capability to operate over the network unless the end customer actually buys special accommodations to accommodate that traffic?
Speaking of throttling, you have 30 seconds each.
So for a 30-second answer on net neutrality, I'm just going to point to a couple of things. One, I don't think the new commissioner is that anti-net neutrality. I think he hated how it was implemented and that it had a giant drive-through bus hole oh, wow, I used a real bad term there. But the ability to do this zero rating for particular service. So if you think you're neutral now, you're not. And we're going to be able to navigate those waters. I'm really not that long-term concerned.
Yeah, I don't know that I think on things like that, my view is that, you read what you read and stuff is usually overhyped. And so I think usually these are reasonable people and things play out the way they should be. At least that's what I like to think. So obviously it would help us maybe a little bit, but that's not what Broadsoft's really about. We want an even playing field.
Right, and I agree. I think the wheels of government are going to take some time to be able to actually define what that means. And I think application development moves much faster. And, in that balance, being able to gain access to the data and information and how you have a service, I just don't see the limitation. So giving carriers the power to limit and restrict and censor, I think has a moral compass that's just incorrect, if you will. And so, I think still the utility to be able to drive applications and services, I can't see anybody, truly implementing an egregious way that would limit the customer base from what it really needs to do with the internet, which is not owned by anybody. So,
And I'm going to add one technological answer to it, super short, SD-WAN.
Thank you. So with that, can you please join me in giving them a hand? They did a great job.